Welcome. Today we are going to dig into a story that's pretty fundamental to European history, something you probably learned back in school. But what if I told you we're going to challenge that whole narrative, using the very evidence it was built on? So let me just start with this one question. What if the Great Barbarian Invasions just didn't happen? At least, not in the way we've always been told. What if the whole story of the Huns, the Avars, and the Mongols is way more local and, honestly, a lot more interesting? You know the classic story, right? It's pretty straightforward. One group, say the Huns, just appears out of the deeps of Asia, terrifies Europe, and then poof, they vanish. Then the Avars show up and do the exact same thing. Then the Mongols. Each one is presented as a totally separate, distinct group of people traveling thousands of miles to get to Europe's doorstep. But what if that's just a little too neat and tidy? Yeah, we're going to call that old story the myth of the steppe waves. And for the next few minutes, we're going to piece together a totally different hypothesis, clue by clue, that paints a very, very different picture of what was really going on.
All right, our first clue doesn't come from some dusty old book. Nope, it comes from what we're actually digging out of the ground. Turns out, archaeology tells a story that's fascinatingly different from the history texts.
So let's look at the gear found in warrior tombs, these burial mounds called kurgans. From a Scythian warrior way back in 700 BC to a Hun warrior in 400 AD, the core technology is, well, it's remarkably similar. It just gets better over time. The composite bow gets an upgrade, the horse bits are made of a new metal, but this doesn't look like a total cultural replacement. It looks more like the same folks just upgrading their equipment. So how do you explain this? Well, there's this really cool concept called traditionscairn. The idea is that it's not a whole population that moves. Instead, a small, really effective elite group of warriors shows up and takes over. And the local tribes, who've been there for ages, they just pledge allegiance to the new management and adopt the new brand, whether that's Hun, Avar, or something else. It's basically a political rebranding, not a population replacement. Now for our second clue, and this one comes from a really surprising place, the very same written sources that created the myth in the first place. If you read them closely, you'll see they kind of give the game away. For 1,000 years, think about that, a millennium, writers in Constantinople used the word Scythian as a catch-all term for basically anyone living north of the Black Sea. It didn't matter if they were Huns, Pechenegs, or Magyars. So were these writers just confused? Or was this the biggest clue of all? Maybe they were actually seeing the same people, just fighting under a different king's flag. And check out this account from the historian Priscus. When he visited Attila the Hun's court, he wasn't expecting what he found. It wasn't some monolithic horde of Asian warriors. It was a multi-ethnic mashup. He found Greeks, Goths, Romans, all living there, all calling themselves Huns. Being a Hun was less about race and more about joining a political project where, hey, the taxes were lower and life was better. Okay, our third and final clue really just comes down to basic logistics. The traditional story, when you think about it, requires a journey that's almost impossible to believe. 5,000 kilometers. Just try to wrap your head around moving hundreds of thousands of people, men, women, children, plus all the animals they need to survive, across that kind of distance, with no roads, no supply depots, no modern infrastructure at all. It's a logistical nightmare. That kind of mass migration would have taken years and left a trail of total devastation. So what's the alternative? A much more believable chain reaction. See, a small elite group of warriors can move fast. They're like a shockwave. When they get to the Pontic steppe, which is modern-day Ukraine, they act as a catalyst. They unite and lead the horse-riding populations that have always been there, living right on Europe's border. The invasion isn't from thousands of miles away. It's a mobilization of Europe's next-door neighbors. So when you put all these clues together, you've got the archaeology, the written records, the simple logistics of it all, a totally new picture of history starts to come into focus. Let's actually put them side by side, the classic invasion model versus this new continuity hypothesis. Let's see how they really stack up against the evidence. Okay, just look at this breakdown. The continuity hypothesis just fits the facts better. It explains why the population doesn't really change genetically. It explains why the archaeology shows a gradual evolution, not a sudden replacement. And it finally solves the big mystery of where all these peoples disappeared to. They didn't disappear at all. The people stayed put. It was just their political name that changed. So why does any of this matter? Well, it changes everything. It means that the Huns and the Avars weren't some alien invaders. They were political projects built from the local population. It means Europe wasn't just getting hit by random storms from a faraway land. It was in a constant, often violent, conversation with the permanent civilization of the steppe right next door. That pressure was always there. And that leaves us with this one powerful idea. So much of history isn't about entire populations moving around, but about power and identity moving around. So the next time you think about the Great Invasions, maybe don't picture a new group of people arriving. Instead, picture a new flag being raised over the same riders on the same horses who were there all along. Makes you wonder, what other parts of history might look different through that same lens?